Rape is worse when it happens to men, reports the New York Times, by Radical Hub, a feminist website. Recently, the New York Times reported that rape is worse when it happens to men than when it happens to women. Quote, "There is no arena in which rape takes place between men and women that it does not take place between men and men. Like women, men who are raped feel violated and ashamed and may become severely depressed or suicidal. They are at increased risk for substance abuse, problems with interpersonal relationships, physical impairments, chronic pain, insomnia, and other health problems. But men also face a challenge to their sense of masculinity. Many feel they should have done more to fight off their attackers. Since they may believe that men are never raped, they may feel isolated and reluctant to confide in anyone. Male rape victims may become confused about their sexual orientation or, if gay and raped by a man, blame their sexual orientation for the rape." Close quote. See what they did there? Rape is X when it happens to women, and rape is X plus 1 when it happens to men. Of course, the Times would probably deny that that's what they said if they were ever asked about it. But look, folks, the math doesn't lie. The way the Times handles this subject is very revealing, and it's not just that they decided to dedicate 2 entire pages to the subject of male victims of rape. While we are just supposed to accept its math at face value and agree with them that male victims suffer the exact same things women suffer, plus 1, we also are not supposed to notice when they are necessarily implying about what they are necessarily implying about femininity and women's sense of ourselves. That femininity is not challenged at all, and our sense of ourselves is not challenged at all when we are raped by men. And let's just assume for the time being that this implication is entirely true. Now, why might that be? Femininity is not challenged at all when men rape women because femininity and women's sense of ourselves as patriarchally constructed women are literally built on women being raped by men. That's what femininity is. If that's not just the complete and unabridged truth of the matter, then ask yourself how in the world could anyone ever think or believe or say in public without being seriously challenged on it that men's gender role is challenged when men are raped by other men, but women's isn't. Women's gender role is actually supported by rape, while conversely, men's is challenged. This is what the Times is saying here, and they are absolutely right. Women are born to be raped, the misogynistic story goes. It's in our natures to be raped, and men are not born to be raped, and it is not in their natures to be raped. When women are raped, it might hurt. Indeed, we may even die from it, but it doesn't challenge anything about our natures or about the nature of the relationship between women and men. The natural order of things is supported when women are raped, while conversely, it is challenged when men are raped. This is what they are saying with this language and setting up men's and women's experience this way. And women's sexuality isn't brought into question when women are raped by men, because women are born to be men's PIV receptacles, penis and vagina receptacles, and that's what women's sexuality is. That's the extent of it. Even in a context of violence or extreme violence, that's the beginning and end of women's sexuality, being penetrated by men's dicks. Women's sexuality is actually supported when they are raped by men, while conversely, men's sexuality is challenged when men are raped. And it was really nice of the Times to sweep the reproductive harm suffered by women and only women through men raping us, including pregnancy and fear of pregnancy, into the dismissive and other health problems dustbin of things that can happen to men who are raped by other men too. An extra added bonus, they had a woman write it. Because as women, handmaidens of the patriarchy are immune from criticism while simultaneously being attractive targets and scapegoats for criticism. Either way, men are safe, but the patriarchy is not, and the ways that men's interlocking systems of oppression work to support men and male privilege at women's expense are not beyond our criticism. 87 responses to the article. FCM says, and P.S., fuck you, New York Times. See what I did there? Mesopiana says, Jesus, world, I hate you more each passing day. Radfems, you keep me from topping myself, which means committing suicide. Witchwind says, the consequences of rape are actually worse when it's done to women. This is a complete reversal of facts. Men have the benefit of credibility when they say they are raped, as whenever they say anything. Women don't. Male rapes represent perhaps 20% of child rapes and 1% of adult rapes. Yet you can find way more articles saying how serious rape on men is, how traumatic it is, etc. They are much more likely to be believed, and nobody minimizes or denies the seriousness of the harm or implies that deep down they're sluts who asked for it. Whenever the media talks about child rape or child paid rape, they usually center on boys, not girls, despite girls being the majority of the victims. Male victims are more respected. The truth is that it's easier for them to talk than for female victims, contrary to this bullshit that it's against their masculinity. Men are not the sex class. By definition, they don't consent to rape or sexual torture or murder. Yeah, fuck you, New York Times. Zeph says, the most damaging long-term effects of rape are disease and pregnancy. Men can be affected by the former, but not the latter. Women can be affected by both. Women also suffer because they may blame themselves, because we know women are constantly told rape is their fault. They wore the wrong thing, went to the wrong place, failed to fight back, or fought back too hard. The fact that most rape happens at home by people the woman knows and trusts, and that this is a devastating betrayal of her friendships and family relationships, according to the New York Times, does not affect her sense of self-worth. In addition, if she tries to bring charges, she is often disbelieved. If she gets as far as court, she often fails to get a conviction. I once had a male friend who was raped by 2 other men, and he was upset, but said that rape was not nearly as bad for men because he knew he could not get pregnant. He obviously had not been informed that he should suffer a devastating loss of his sense of masculinity, so he didn't. Molka Aranis says, it amazes me how men go on about victimization being a sign of weakness and discussing it as some kind of a melodramatic party and crying wolf. But when it comes to them, you would think they were auditioning for Hamlet. Fuck, you want to talk about melodramatic pity parties and histrionics? Listen to a male describe his victimization, and it doesn't have to be a sex crime, and how it's way worse than anything a woman or girl could ever experience. Men get to be blameless, pure victims, and showered with accolades of, oh, you're so brave for coming forward, you poor thing. Whilst women and girls are viciously shunned and derided as accomplices rather than victims or survivors in men's crimes committed against us. Again, it doesn't even have to be a sex crime because nothing bad should ever happen to the bros. That's for chicks. Fuck New York Times. Hecuba says, proves yet again, for the umpteenth time, rape is only rape when men are the ones who are raped by other males. Men continue to define rape from their male perspective, and that is why rape is never rape when a male rapes a female, because according to male supremacist lies, women are men's disposable sexual service stations. Fact is, number of adult males raped by other males pales in comparison to men's continuing global war on women, girls, and female babies. Males routinely subject females of any age, ethnicity, class, and race to male sexual violence because it is never rape according to the male supremacist mantra. Females cannot lose their female identity because we have none. We only have the label men's disposable sexual service stations. Males, however, when they are raped by a male, supposedly lose their masculinity because they have become the feminized other, and no male wants to become that despised creature, the female human. New York Times conveniently ignores the fact that female survivors of men's sexual violence suffer post-traumatic stress, but of course PTSD only applies to men, does it not? Because only men are the ones who define truth and reality, and their myopic vision is always permanently focused on other males, never females in our experiences. That is why real rape is only real rape when a male rapes another male. Cherry Blossom Life says, my letter. To whom it may concern, I was disappointed to learn about your article dismissing the harms of rape for women. It implied that getting pregnant and consequently being forced to undergo an abortion, or worse, being forced to carry your rapist baby to term, in which case you can die, please check the maternal death rate statistics, is less important than men's masculinity. Your article states that men suffer a blow to their masculinity and sexuality, as though this was an additional trauma that men must undergo when raped. You are assuming, of course, that all women are heterosexual, and you are also stating that women's sexuality is based upon rape. Femininity is the box women are pushed into in order for men to feel masculine. Rape can render a woman feminine, sure, if feminine means docile, timid, passive, and submissive, but you are confusing cause and effect. Daniela says, "This may have been a bit too much for me to read today. I feel torrents unleashed within me. I'll try to focus and not rage all over the place." First, this post is deeply excellent. If it wouldn't bring hordes of fun femmes down upon this site, I'd link it everywhere I could. Now, as for the rage, it's because it's just right there, so baldly stated. Like women, men who are raped feel ... but men also face. But men also face. But men also face. I swear I blanked out for a minute when I read that, as it just repeated in my head. You put it so well. For men, rape is X+1, and of course if there is a plus, that means more. Rape of men is more awful, more damaging, more wrong, more to be condemned. And of course that brings to mind the prison rape controversy. I admit I'd be afraid to say this anywhere but here, and the last thing I would ever do is try to minimize the pain men who are raped in prison feel. But I've got to say this. I honestly think 9 times out of 10, prison rape is only brought up to minimize the constant threat and reality of rape that all women experience every day around the world. They do not actually care. And the worst part of it is that, of course, women are constantly raped in prison as well, and more likely to be by their male guards. But whenever they say prison rape, it always means the rape of men. Because, of course, what happens to female prisoners is, well, what naturally happens to women. Women are supposed to be raped in prison and everywhere else. Finally, the Penn State scandal and Jerry Sandusky. You know what I kept thinking about throughout the whole thing? If it were a bunch of teenage girls who bravely stepped forward to press charges, there would be no gnashing of teeth on their behalf. The school wouldn't have fired their venerated old dirtbag coach. There would be no resignations, no investigation of child charities, no FBI involvement, no statements by the governor. Sure as hell, ESPN, and all the other sports outlets would never ever rend their garments in lamentation for the suffering of those girls. No, they'd be called sluts, probably out for revenge or something. Remember Duke Lacrosse, they'd all say, because girls can't be raped, even the ones that are. Witchwind says, I'd say rape on girls and women compared to men is X+1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. Way worse than anything a man can experience. First one, pregnancy. Second one, abortion. Third one, termed pregnancy and then forced to raise children from rape. Fourth one, possible death or severe complications from pregnancy or abortion. Fifth one, diseases, STDs, and AIDS. Sixth one, undiagnosed and untreated PTSD, often resulting in increased vulnerability to more rape, intimate male terrorism, prostitution, marginalization, exclusion, poverty, depression, long-term incapacity to work, etc. Seventh one, impossibility to ask for help or even be heard, reduction to silence, systematic accusation and shaming of the female victims, systematic denial and disbelief of the violence and protection of the male perpetrators, complete invisibilization of victims, etc., etc. So, adult men don't even scratch the surface of this. Now, men equals X+1? Really? Feuerwerferin says, this is the second time already that I've been handmaiden-splained, not mansplained, this misogynistic fantasy. The first time was in a pseudo-feminist book about rapes on Bosnia-Herzegovina, although we all know that those women were forced to birth and held in rape camps. That did not happen to men, obviously. I'm still enraged to the core. No woman's identity and self is to be a plaything for men. None, never. Woman does not equal rape receptacle. When fun femmes claim to be against rape and rape culture, they obviously just don't understand what they're talking about. They are handmaidens of the patriarchy, because every woman is a feminist, quote. Christina says, I'm disgusted by this, but don't be surprised by it. It just once again confirms that we're living in an oppressive and sexist male-dominated society. It's time to start cleaning up society. Grain says, let us remember this is the same paper that wrote about the gang rape of a little girl by making prominent notes of the types of clothes she wore, as if she enticed all those men. So fuck the New York Times. Feuerwerferin says, Also, this is the transsexuals and transgenders idea that the worst thing that can be done to anyone is to act against their gender. Thus, it is allegedly worse to rape men than women. The misogyny is breathtaking. If it is not rape culture to assert that women are destined to be raped and that it's not such a big deal when women are raped, then what exactly does rape culture even mean? Maggie quotes from the article. And young men raised by poor single mothers are especially vulnerable to male predators, says Dr. Zane Gates, an internist who cares for low-income patients on Medicaid at a community health center in Altoona, Pennsylvania. You're looking for a male figure in your life desperately, and you'll give anything for that, he said. Close quote. So of course their mums couldn't possibly be a good parental carer, especially if they're poor. The only thing these poor emasculated men need is a father figure. Utter shite. Men do get raped. Note, it didn't include those in prison, and can suffer psychological and physical injuries, but they don't have the added risk of pregnancy and don't have their integrity called into question because they are all believed. The article is unbelievably misogynistic. FCM says, there are just so many things wrong with this, it's hard to get to them all. But this, quote, since they may believe that men are never raped, they may feel isolated and reluctant to confide in anyone. Male rape victims may become confused about their sexual orientation or, if gay and raped by a man, blame their sexual orientation for the rape, close quote. Why does that make sense and this doesn't? And they are saying it doesn't by setting men's and women's experience up as converse. Women know that women are always raped, so they feel isolated and reluctant to confide in anyone. Or, why does that make sense? Well, this doesn't. Female rape victims may become confused about their sexuality because they don't believe women are to be used like objects and thrown away, but that's what women's sexuality is. Or this. Female rape victims may become confused about their sexuality because they hate men or don't want to have sex with men, but they feel sexually and emotionally bonded to their attacker after the rape. Or this. Female rape victims may become confused about their sexuality because they like men and are attracted to men, but start to realize that men hate women and that men rape women. YTTIK says, consent really is the default state for women, so when a woman is raped, she actually has to prove that she didn't want it to happen. Not so with men. It is assumed that rape is an awful thing no man would want to go through. We don't really question what male victims were wearing or whether or not they were asking for it or why they were walking alone at night. When it comes to women, our culture can barely distinguish between rape and consensual sex. It's practically the same thing. The burden of trying to prove that there is a difference falls on the woman who was raped. She has to provide several pieces of evidence to prove that she wasn't existing in her default state of consent. Not only that, she has to prove that she clearly communicated this fact to her rapist. He apparently has no idea that women don't equal sex and that it's not okay to force one to have sex with you because most of the time it really is perceived as okay in this culture to do just that. That is why women exist, right? Things are so convoluted, we actually had to make rape like a property crime so people would understand. Yes, there's a woman existing in a constant state of consent, but she belongs to somebody else, so it's not okay to take what isn't yours. Not that women are full human beings who should have some say over what happens to them, but that they are somebody else's sexual receptacle. Men don't experience any of this. FCM says, laughing out loud at handmaiden-splained, that's a good one. So true. Is that what slutwalk was? Handmaidens of the patriarchy splainin' what's wrong with the P and splainin' what's wrong with rape? It's helpful to think of it that way because it makes it obvious that there really was no other outcome available besides it being the convoluted mess it was. They had to support it at the exact same time they were allegedly criticizing it, because that's what handmaiden-splaining is. The Unwound One says, I hate handmaidens so much, I want to vomit after reading this. FCM says, that's what it takes if a woman wants to work at the New York Times. Clearly, I don't begrudge her that. I really don't. It's not her fault. I bet she earned high praises for this article, and she's currently being salivated on by everyone who matters. I hope she saves her money and doesn't have to do it for very long. Kathy says, what Witchwind and Hecubus said, and YTTIK. Of course it's worse when it happens to men because they are human. We're supposed to relax and enjoy it because deep down we're just sluts who really wanted it. If the Penn State coach and Catholic priest had only raped and molested girls, would anyone have even given a shit? Child rapists who land in jail are in danger if their victims were boys, but not if the victims are just girls. So we've made this huge progressive leap by defining rape to include male victims. Yay, isn't society grand? Now maybe we'll start taking it seriously, even if for only male victims. Mocha Erinus says, being a female sycophant for the patriarchy does have its perks. Look at all the infamous anti-feminist female authors who earn a living off of being pro-misogynist, regardless if it kills them inside, mentally and spiritually, or they revel in all the praise they receive from the androcrats because that means they're one of the good ones. And they honestly believe that it will protect them from misogynistic attacks and male violence, and it might, for a while. These women would be more than happy to give the bros a pound of female flesh so they don't turn against them. It's a sadomasochistic form of internalized misogyny and self-preservation. Court jesters and delusional happy house slaves. FCM says, yes, and she's probably not saving her money either, and is likely being paid too little to begin with. If she's spending her pittance on fuckability mandates or even professionality mandates, same thing, she's not saving it, and the likelihood that this is her situation exactly is extremely high, because that's the situation for so many women and so many professional women. It's sickening. Crikey types a bunch of unintelligible letters. That was my reaction to this. But as with most misogynistic bullshit, if you dig through this crap, you find some truth. Thank you so much, RadFemHub, for pulling a daily with the reversals in this article. I'm submitting a letter to the New York Times too. Anybody with the time should do so, because this is misogyny writ large. If the woman who wrote this article isn't already conscious of the truth implicit in the things she wrote, maybe some letters to the editor will help open her eyes to a woman-identified view of the issues. Maggie says, strike, this article is unbelievably misogynistic. 2. This article is misogynistic. Nothing unbelievable about it. Same old, same old. Great post and a lively comment section. Brilliant. Fern says, I tried to share this post and some of my friends protested, don't create a dichotomy that doesn't need to be there. Rape is bad for everyone and it doesn't depend on gender. I don't understand how you can look at rape as anything but a gendered crime that stems from hatred of women. Even when men rape each other, they are seen as making the victim their bitch. The physical act of rape is brutal for both men and women, but the aftermath is much worse for women because not only does she have to worry about pregnancy, but her rape confirms all the negative messages society sends at women every day. Men are just caught in the crossfire of misogyny, and their pain comes from, this shouldn't happen to me, and the outrage that their status has been threatened. It's relatively easy to build that status back up again after the rape, whereas the woman only has her status as the sex class confirmed and can't easily build herself back up again after the rape because of all the messages in society constantly telling women they are sex objects. Yisheng Kinghua says, quote, if the Penn State coach and Catholic priest had only raped and molested girls, would anyone even give a shit? Quote, nope, and they would have accused them of lying or asking for it. Gah, it hurts to even type that. I am so enraged by this New York Times article, quote, unquote. Thank you for putting this rage into words, because all I can do right now is scream. Loop Loop Guru says, of course, the handmaiden of the patriarchy who wrote this article doesn't bother to define sense of masculinity. She probably thinks everyone will get her point right away, but I have some questions. Does she mean that men who have been raped suddenly feel they can no longer splash their cheeks with a subtle yet rugged aftershave? Do they lose interest in tying the perfect half Windsor so as to make a good impression on their date? Do they perhaps stop doing crunches because they no longer care about having six-pack abs? No. By sense of masculinity, She means these men's sense of being in charge of their own bodies, of being autonomous, of not being sexual prey, of being able to defend themselves and ensure their own safety. It's their sense of being human that's been challenged. But by conflating that with masculinity, she tacitly admits that women aren't supposed to see themselves the same way men do, as fully enfranchised adult human beings. In case Miss Handmaiden of the Patriarchy wanders over here, I've written the female version. But women who have been raped also face a challenge to their sense of personal autonomy and authority over their own bodies. Often, this occurs after they have already endured years of less extreme but still serious challenges to the same in the form of sexual harassment at work, in school, and on the street, and in the form of having their right to say no ignored by unwanted but persistent suitors, some of whom turn into stalkers. Additionally, they must also deal with idiots who are unwilling to acknowledge that bodily autonomy matters as much to women as it does to men, and in the same way. FCM quotes, "Does she mean that men who have been raped suddenly feel they can no longer splash their cheeks with a subtle yet rugged aftershave?" Quote, "This made me laugh out loud. Yes, you are so right. That's not what she meant. And she means the other thing instead. Excellent, Loop Loop. Thanks." Yisheng Kinghua says, "Oh my, Loop Loop, you just made me laugh out loud right before my nightly attempts to run. Wins or not. Guffaw. Thanks." Bodie McLeod says, "The New York Times said, quote, but men also face a challenge to their sense of masculinity, quote. In other words, their sense of humanity. Because according to patriarchal logic, masculinity equals humanity. But since women aren't fully human to begin with, we don't have that to struggle with. For women, there's nothing to lose because we're already women. That's the way they see it. It says a lot about gender roles when the New York Times openly admits that raping a woman raises no challenge to her gender role." Oh, now that I've read the comments, I see that Loop Loop already pointed that out. Yes, exactly. They think that a sense of humanity is something that only belongs to men. Alouetta says, "This article isn't even the worst of it. Men make themselves out to be the victims when they're the perpetrators, and these sycophants still literally put a man's self-perception over a woman's life. Just before the new year on another blog I lurk, one of the regular commenters admitted to being an abuser who terrorized his now separated wife for 5 years. The response was absolutely repulsive. They all applauded him for manning up to his behavior without any proof he actually intended to change it, and said he was a good husband and father. Yes, he has kids. On top of that, they blamed the wife, saying it must be her personality that sets him off because he's such a nice guy, don't you know? There are multiple sides to every story," was a common theme. Even a woman who had her son's, of course it was her son's, name in her username supported the men's rights activist who had the audacity to say this guy still had a right to see the kids, and that if we wanted what's best for the children, we'd support the husband in getting his family back together, so they could have their oh-so-critical father figure. I can't express how disgusted I am after seeing this stuff ad nauseum. When will women care about themselves?" Feuer-Werferin says, quote, "It says a lot about gender roles when the New York Times openly admits that raping a woman raises no challenge to her gender role." Quote, "Exactly. Thank you, Bodhi. Ironically, that's almost like radical feminist critique of femininity. Fuckability is part of it. Also, what does this say about sex? Read PIV. Apparently, it must be similar to rape after all. The similar part is penetration. But even regular egalitarians say that rape is equally bad for everyone and that sex, read PIV, is totally different from rape despite penetration. Thus, it can't be less harmful for women than for men. Ergo, this misogynistic article is not even egalitarian. A part of Fun Femmes is not even egalitarian too. Okay, we all knew that already. The equation that penetration equals violation is implied in this reasoning. Well, that's what the supposedly bad, insane Andrea Dworkin said too. It's just not okay to say it with women's liberation in mind, that's all. It's just bad to say it when you criticize it. But it's okay to say it when you want to give men more privilege than women, meaning to be taken more seriously and get more compassion, and when you want to imply that it's women's nature to be the victims. The hypocrisy, it burns. I don't want to single the author out as particularly woman-hating. In fact, men say and write it all the time. Fuck means to harm, violate, kill, etc. As in, fuck, insert a person. Fuck, insert a country. Fuck you, etc. I haven't read about a language for which this is not true. And women are supposed to be the masochists to varying degrees, thus it is okay for women to be fucked. No thanks. Claim rejected. By the way, I did not contradict the claim that sexual violence against women includes an additional dimension that men don't experience. Thus, regular egalitarians are wrong too. That is pregnancy. Regular egalitarians pretend as if pregnancy was not there, thus their conclusion that rape is equally bad for everyone. What men and their handmaidens claim is that men suffer a big emotional, psychological distress from rape than women do. A bigger one. That I have talked about. I did not say anything about other forms of harm. Dancing Fire says, quote, male rape victims may become confused about their sexual orientation or, if gay and raped by a man, blame their sexual orientation for the rape. Quote, if you change that around, female rape victims may become confused about their sexual orientation or, if lesbian and raped by a man, blame their sexual orientation for the rape. So lesbians who are raped by a man become confused and think they're not lesbian after all? No? Didn't think so. The second part of that sentence, however, can be true, as in corrective rape. FCM says, yes, if anyone were to admit that there is such a thing as reproductive harm to women via the penis, meaning unwanted or ambivalent pregnancy and fear of unwanted pregnancy, they would have no choice but to admit that PIV is also harmful to women in the exact same way, and that PIV as sex paradigm is rooted in misogyny and supports male power at women's expense. So they must deny it in every context, even in the context of rape, although with rape it's harder to do with a straight face. The fact that there's been some discussion recently about providing emergency contraception to women who present to hospitals for the treatment of rape-related injuries simultaneously makes this point clear, and seems to have largely flown under the radar or has failed to spark the most obvious discussion. But that is evidence of willful ignorance, nothing more. The connection is there to be made, and it really couldn't be more obvious. PIV and rape cause some of the same kinds of harm for women. Whether someone got punched in the face or suffered facial injuries in a car accident, no one would ever deny that the person was harmed in both contexts, and they wouldn't say that one was a facial trauma but the other wasn't, just because one was caused during a consensual basketball game and the other during a robbery. But they deny it when it comes to the female-specific harms of the penis. God forbid anyone have to give up their precious sexy. No matter what the benefits to women, if it comes at the cost of PIV, the cost is just too high. Women, quote, aren't even allowed to read here, quote, because trans criticism happens here. Other women, quote, will attempt to humiliate, shame, and rehabilitate women who read here, no matter how good our work is, no matter how much it helps women, and no matter how valid our trans criticism is too, because transphobia. That is fucking infuriating. Is that, if that's what that is, it really fucking is. Loretta Kemsley says the whole "it's worse for men" hyperbole is based on homophobia, which is based in Bible admonitions against homosexuality. Bible admonitions against homosexuality, which are only aimed at men, are based on misogyny. Per the culture of the time, men were not supposed to penetrate other men because they were lowering the penetrated male to the class of being female. Being female was so despised that the men rose every morning and praised God for not making them female. Their entire sexual culture was based on enslaving women for the purpose of raping them for a lifetime. Major passages in the Old Testament were devoted to God telling them to go neighboring villages and murdering everybody except for the virgin girls. Read preteen, since girls were married off at Monarch. The virgin girls were their spoils of war, who they brought home and serially raped for the rest of their lives, which was called marriage. Even dear old Moses, the savior of the Jews, was quoted giving these instructions. In fact, he was angry at his soldiers for bringing home adult women to rape and ordered them all slain immediately, but added that they could keep the little girls to rape. Is it any wonder why the religious are still into raping women and children? Or that it is still a worse sin for two consenting men to engage in sex with each other than for a man to rape a woman? As long as religions exist that endorse the misogyny of the Torah, aka the Old Testament, misogyny will be the law and the culture of our land. It's appalling to see the New York Times so openly endorsing this culture of sexual slavery for women. It's great to see the Radfem Hub taking on the New York Times for endorsing violent sexual misogyny. Isn't it astounding that the New York Times can so blithely assume their articles are not sexist and indeed are sympathetically non-sexist because they are so generously discussing how men are harmed by being lowered into women's reality? Witchwind says, "It's sad, really. But this is one of the ways patriarchy prevents women from accessing rad feminism. What's not easier than putting a taboo on reading it and shaming women who do? Make women believe women can be women, make women believe men can be women, then make these women believe that being a rad fem is discriminating against those men who dress as their misogynistic fantasy of women, and chastise any women who don't comply to these men's demands. There's your taboo to rad feminism. Ta-da! So women aren't allowed to read any rad fem blog or article anymore. Perfectly rounded manipulation." FCM says, yes, transphobia and sex negativity pretty much shore that up, don't they? And who benefits from trans inclusion and PIV positivism while simultaneously having nothing to gain from feminism or radical feminism? 'Cause it's the same people, i.e. men. This should not keep women from reading radical feminists, but it does, and this is deliberate. Karmarad says, rape is worse for men because to feel like a woman is an unutterable humiliation. That's a good part of it anyway. Isis says, this whole issue of rape lowering men and hurting them worse than women sort of mirrors the argument of the rich. It'll hurt us more if we have to give up our money because, well, you don't have money and we do, so we have more to lose. Yeah, that's it.